Thank you. All right, guys. Well, today we're talking about a very, very interesting subject. And today we're talking about something that you all asked me to cover. And that is, what are excise duties and what are taxes? Does anybody know here what excise and taxes are? Does anybody know what they are? Who can tell me? Let's start with, who have I got? Shavanod. Open your microphone. Tell me, what is excise and duties, Shavanad? Go ahead. Open your microphone. Are you there, Shavanad?
Yes,
Tell
yes,
me, what do you
I'm
think excise is?
Can you hear me or not?
exercise means do something, practice some
Excise, not exercise, excise tax.
uh,
What is
exercise.
excise? Do you know?
Uh, really no, sir. Really don't know about exercise.
Okay, all right, great. You're
But
about to
actually,
learn.
I raised my hand for. I cannot. I'm disabled to check, sir. Actually, I'm at workplace, so I not able to open camera. So I want to close
Well,
my
you need to
camera.
put a message. No, Shavanad, I've already explained 3 times. You need to
But
put a
here
message in
inside,
the chat box saying, my name is your full name. I am at work. You can switch off your camera once you've done that.
yes,
However,
sir.
during the
But I
lesson, but listen carefully, during the lesson, if I call you, you must reply. If you don't reply, I'll mark you absent. Because in
uh,
order to get the certificate, you must be listening to the lesson. So I will check on you even if you've got your camera switched off. Okay?
okay, so I understood. But here the host as disabled group chat, sir. So I cannot chat here. I cannot send message here.
Okay. Well, you need to send a message in the chat box. Why can't you put a message?
Okay, now can, sir. Now can.
Why?
No, no, just now cannot, sir. Now okay, ready. Now I
All
can
right.
chat.
Well, then, Shahanat, you can send a message. All the others are sending messages. So there's
Okay.
no cannot. Okay. Please follow the class rules. All right. If I call on you, make sure you answer or I'll mark you absent. Thank you, Shavanat. All right, guys. Sorry about that. So we're talking about excise taxes. What is excise? Can anyone tell me what excise is? Medina, could you make sure the chat box is open? Everybody's sending me messages, but 2 students say it's closed. But the chat box is definitely open. If you could just fix that, Medina. Okay. I've got 50 messages, yet 2 students claim it's closed. If you could just fix that, please. All right. So today we're talking about excise taxes. Does anybody know what excise is? Let's talk to Alan Joy. Hi, Alan Joy. What does excise mean, gorgeous?
Hello, sir. For my own
Yeah.
understanding, excise goods is a government imposed tax on on a specific product or services to regulate the consumption and to gain a revenue on the government.
Very good. That's a very good explanation, Alan Joy. Thank you for that. Thank you. Okay, Alan Joy, that was a good explanation. Also, those who have given their explanation in the chat box, very good. Excellent. Okay, who else would like to talk to me? Julianne, what's your explanation, Julianne? Are you there, Julianne?
Hello, sir.
Julianne, go ahead.
Yes,
What do you think excise means, gorgeous?
yes, sir.
Are you there, Julianne? I can't hear you. Yeah, I'm sorry, your microphone is not working,
Tax
Julianne.
means the internal.
Yeah, you need to fix your microphone. I can't hear you, ma'am. I'll come back to you. Okay, all right, so let's go on. Let's talk about excise. Basically, excise is a form of tax imposed on a particular type of goods, and it depends what type of goods they are and where they originate from. Okay, so let's talk about what excise taxes are, what tariffs are, and what can you do in business to make sure that you do not allow excise to eat up your customer base. Because the higher the excise, the more you pay for the goods and the higher your selling price is. Let's start by sharing today's lesson and let's start talking about this. Here we go. All right, guys, just give me a moment and we start today's lesson. Okay, so today we're talking about duties, excise, and tariff traps. A lot of you are new entrepreneurs. A lot of you decide to go into business and you say to yourself, it's okay, I'll buy product from China and I'll sell it. But a lot of you, when you order the product, what happens is after the product reaches your country, you need to pay taxes at customs before you can clear the product. And that means the cost of your product landed in your warehouse becomes higher, and therefore your selling price will need to increase. So what are customs? What are duties? What are tariffs? What are they? These are imposed by governments on goods when they are exported across international borders. So this means if you're buying handphones from China, they will be imposed by the government on the goods that are being exported out of China or imported to your country. Okay? So what that means is if you order 20 handphones from China, there will be an excise imposed that you will have to pay before those goods clear customs. The taxes are collected by customs authority at the point of entry or exit of a country. So usually, if you are buying goods from China and they are being sent to the Philippines, excise will be collected either in China or in the Philippines, depending on the laws relevant to your country. How much you pay depends on factors such as what type of product, its value, and the country it's coming from. Okay, now remember that these excise and customs duties are used by governments to regulate international trade and generate revenue for their country. It's also to protect their own industries from excessive foreign competition. I'll give you an example, Julianne. If you want to import t-shirts from China, and the t-shirts in China only cost you $2. However, in the Philippines, you can buy those t-shirts from a Filipino factory for $4. So the Filipino government will impose a tax on your import from China in order to protect local Filipino manufacturers. Do you understand that, Julianne? So in future, they prefer you to buy from your own country's factories rather than buy from China. Okay, so remember that these taxes or tariffs are imposed. And when you're doing business, you need to understand what these are before you decide to buy goods from another country. So let's talk about them. Customs is the process applied by the border authority that inspects and classifies goods entering or leaving a country and collects what is owed to them. Okay? Duties. The taxes charged on goods that cross the border based on their type, value, and country of origin. The tariffs. The published schedule of rates that sets how much duty applies to each category of imported goods. Now, these tariffs are available from your own government in your own country, or you can usually find out through the manufacturer who's selling you goods from another country. Now, let's look at the border step by step. Goods arrive at the Philippine border from China. Customs will inspect the goods that you're buying, and they will classify those based on what type of goods they are. They will then check the tariff list to see what tariff rate is applied to those goods. They will make you pay duty, which is the rate times the value of the goods you purchased. For example, if Julianne orders $100 worth of t-shirts from China and there is a 20% duty, then they will charge her 20% of $100 and she will have to pay that to customs to clear her t-shirts. So that means the t-shirts did not cost her $100. The t-shirts have now cost Julianne $120. So that means Julianne's selling price will go up. Do you understand that, everyone? Julianne? Do you understand that, Ellen Joy? Put your hand up, Ellen Joy, if you understand. Very good. So once Julianne pays the duty, she will be able to clear it from customs in her own country. So remember, customs is the process at the border. Tariffs and duties are taxes collected on goods entering the country. Now, some countries call them tariffs, some countries call them duty. So they basically have the same meaning. Let's look at this. Why do governments charge these duties? One, they want to generate revenue. Let me give you an example. You are a United States retailer, a US retailer, and you import $500,000 of Swiss watches from Switzerland. A 10% duty means you will have to pay $50,000 to the US government to bring those watches into the US. Why? Because the US government wants to protect the companies that make watches in America. Does everybody understand that? Yes or no? They generate revenue. Number two is to protect local industry. Example, a 20% tariff on cheap imported solar panels lets local makers compete on price. Let me give you an example. You're buying watches from China. The watch coming from China costs you $20. However, if you buy the same watch made in America, you will pay $50 from the factory. So the government wants to protect American watchmakers, because if they allow you to bring cheap Chinese watches into the market, then no one will buy more expensive American watches. Therefore, they will impose a tariff. And last but not least, they want to support country trade policy. What do we mean by that? You had all recently understood that President Trump imposed tariffs against governments all over the world because he wanted to protect American manufacturers. So, duties are a strategic tool raised to counter unfair trade like dumping or lowered under free trade agreements. Example, in the US-China dispute, new tariffs pushed some firms to move production to Vietnam, India, and Mexico. Why? Because if they produce those goods in China, they will have to face a tax when they are exported to the United States, right? Therefore, if they produce them in Vietnam or they produce them in India or Mexico, that tariff or tax will be lower. All right, so remember how customs and duties are applied to your goods. Let me explain. Duties are calculated as a percentage of what we know in the business as CIF. What does CIF mean, everyone? CIF means cost, insurance, and freight. Let me explain. Julie buys 100 t-shirts for $200. On top of that, the cost of freight is $50. That's $250. The cost of insurance is $50. That brings the total bill up to $300. The cost of this is $300. Now, when the goods arrive in the Philippines, the Filipino government will charge you excise and duty on $300. Do you understand that, everyone? You will pay the duty and tax on the total cost, including insurance and freight, the CIF price. Okay? Now, this means CIF represents the total cost of bringing the goods to the Philippines before customs clearance. Okay? So, now the t-shirts cost Julie Ann $300 to reach the Philippines. Once they reach the Philippines, there may be a 10% duty. So that means she will have to pay $30 to the Filipino Customs Department to clear her t-shirts. Now that means that the 100 t-shirts no longer costs her $200. They cost her $330. So that means Julie Ann will have to sell those t-shirts at a higher price. Do you understand that, everyone? Very good. So cost is the purchase price paid to the supplier. Insurance is the cost of insuring those goods against damage whilst they're in transit. And freight is the transportation cost to get them to deliver to your country. Now, some people like Julianne and Aloni and Marifi might say, but sir, I don't pay insurance. I save $50. Okay, Marifi, but if you don't pay insurance and you import your goods by container in the sea and unheard of, that cargo ship actually drowns in the middle of the ocean and does not reach its destination, that means the $200 worth of t-shirts you've lost because you have no insurance on the goods you're shipping. So there is no question about saving money on insurance. That is a fundamental part to protect your purchase. All right, so let me give you an example. A company imports electronic components with the following costs. Listen carefully. Cost of goods, $20,000. Okay? I want everybody to write this down. Insurance is $500. The freight is $1,500 to ship the container. The CIF value is 20,000 plus 500 plus 1,500. That means the cost of the goods you're importing to your country is $22,000. Now, when they reach your country, if the duty rate is 8%, then you have to pay your local customs $1,760 in duties for you to get the goods. If you don't pay, they will not give you the goods and you will lose your money. So that means the total cost of the goods you have brought to your country will become $23,760. So that means the selling price of the televisions or the electronic machines that you bought will have to be sold at a higher price. Do you understand that, Tri Nuri? Tri Nuri Zoriana, do you understand what I explained? Okay, good. Marifi, do you understand what I explained, Marifi? Good girl. All right, let's go on. Okay. Now, remember that different products are classified under different tariffs. For example, every product is assigned a harmonized tariff schedule code, and these are international. You can go to the internet and search for harmonized tariff schedules and look up what tariff applies to what goods. They are also known internationally as an HS, Harmonized System Code. They're available commonly on the internet if you're importing goods from overseas. Also, if you're buying from a factory in China, you should ask them to confirm what the HTS or the harmonized code is before you buy the goods. So if you use the correct code, okay, because an incorrect classification could cause you a problem. Now, if when you buy the goods, you do not look at the right code and you assume that the tariff on these goods is only 8%, but you have used the wrong code. And when your goods arrive in your country in the Philippines, that excise or duty could be 20%. And therefore, you might find yourself with goods that you cannot sell. Does everybody understand this, Mafi? Come on, girls. Wave your hands when I talk to you. Do you understand this? Good on you, Mafi. Please pay attention, everyone. I don't want you going to sleep on me, please. All right, Butch, do you understand what I've explained, Butch? Butch, do you understand? Good, Butch. I love your baseball hat, mate. Nice cap. Please pay attention, sir. All right. So remember, product classification is an important part of importing goods from overseas manufacturers. Example. I want you to listen careful, Mafi, and you too, Diana Lopez. A company imports cotton t-shirts and classifies them under the appropriate HTS code for cotton apparel. That code may carry 12% duty rate, while polyester t-shirts may be subject to a different tariff rate. So you must make sure when you buy t-shirts that the manufacturer confirms whether they're cotton, polyester, or a mix of both, because that means that you will have to pay a different amount of tax as the importer. The importer is the buyer. The exporter is the seller. Payment. It is the importer of record responsibility to pay the customs duties. So if Diana contacts a factory in China through Alibaba and buys 100 t-shirts, when the t-shirts reach her port of destination, say the Philippines, before the courier can deliver those goods to Diana, she will have to pay the excise duty on those goods. So what will happen? If the goods were shipped to the Philippines, for example, with DHL, when the goods arrive in the Philippines, customs will calculate the duty. DHL will contact Diana and they will say you have imported t-shirts and you need to pay a duty of $100. Diana will have to pay that to DHL before they will able to release the shipment from Filipino customs and deliver that to her. All right. So it is the importer's responsibility to pay the duty either directly to customs or through the clearing agent, being the company that delivers it to you. Let me give you an example, Butch. You sell furniture, Butch, okay? And you import office chairs from another country. After paying customs, shipping costs, and other import expenses, you increase the selling price of each chair to recover these initial costs while maintaining its desired profit margin. So what happens is Butch planned to sell the chair for $50. However, when he sold the chair for $50, his profit margin was 50%. So the total cost was $25. But after he pays the duties and excise, the cost of the chair is now $40. If he still sells it for $50, his profit margin will not even cover his costs. He will not even break even because he's only getting $10. That will not even cover the rent and the salaries of his salespeople. So that means he can no longer sell the chair for $50. Butch would probably have to sell the chair now for $80. So what will that do to Butch's market? Less people may buy his chair. Do you understand that, Butch? Okay. An excise tax is an indirect tax imposed by the government on specific goods, all right? These taxes are often referred to as sin taxes because they commonly target products that may have negative effects on public health and society, such as alcohol and tobacco. Does anybody here smoke? Do you smoke, Butch? No? Okay. Does anybody here smoke? Does anybody here smoke? Put your hands up if you smoke. Great. Well, if you smoke or you vape, which you shouldn't because it causes cancer, okay, every time you buy cigarettes, you're welcome, Mohammed. Every time you buy cigarettes, you pay tax on that tobacco. For example, if you buy Marlboro, which is an international cigarette that everybody smokes around the world, and it's one of the Philippines' highest selling cigarettes, you will know that the Filipino government imposes a sin tax on all tobacco. And even though it might cost $5 to bring them to the Philippines, by the time they sell them, they have to sell them for $7. So usually imported cigarettes and alcohol are at a higher level of taxation. Does everybody understand that? Let me give you an example. If I go to Indonesia, I can buy 30 cigarettes, a packet of cigarettes, for approximately $3. Everybody understand that? $3. If I buy the same cigarettes in Australia, they will cost me 20 Australian dollars, which is about $18. Why? Because Australia imposes a higher sin tax on tobacco and alcohol. Does everybody understand that? Yes or no? Indonesia imposes a lower tax because a higher number of their population smoke. But from what I hear, the government now is looking at changing those laws. Christine Lu Buelva, if you're at work, you need to send a message stating, my name is, I am at work. And then you may switch off your camera. However, should I call your name at any time, you must answer or you will be marked absent. All right, so does everybody understand now what I mean by sin taxes? Yes or no? Yes or no? Put your hands up. Come on. Very good. Excellent. Okay, so let's talk about other goods that have high taxes. Alcohol, tobacco, electronic cigarettes, okay? Anything that can cause harm to the human being or the human body now has tax. Does everybody know that Coca-Cola now bears a sugar tax? Did everybody know that? Yes or no? Okay. Many years ago, the British government decided to come up with the idea that if you manufacture soft drinks and the sugar content exceeded a certain amount percentage-wise, your drinks would be taxed at 40%. So therefore, Coca-Cola came up with sugar-free Coke, Diet Coke, caffeine-free Coke, and they also kept regular Coke. But the amount of sugar in the regular Coke was lowered. The reason that Coca-Cola, Schweppes, and all the other soft drink companies did that is to avoid a sin tax, a sugar tax. Does everybody understand this? Yes or no? Put your hands up. Come on. Who drinks Coke here? Put your hands up if you drink Coke. Come on, show me your hands, Coca-Cola lovers. I'm also a Coca-Cola lover, but I stopped drinking it when they reduced the sugar because it no longer tastes the same. Does everybody agree with that? Yes or no? It tasted better with all the sugar in it, but now it tastes different. But do you think that affected Coca-Cola? No. More people buy Coca-Cola now because they think it's a healthier drink. So lowering the sugar content, even though the government was trying to punish Coca-Cola, Coca-Cola are now selling more Coca-Cola. Does everybody understand that? Because the consumer now is more health conscious. For example, if we talk to Thenmala, she is health conscious. She doesn't want to drink too many sweet drinks, so she doesn't put on weight. She wants the boys to love her because she's got a beautiful body. So she will drink Coca-Cola with less sugar. Am I right, Thenmala? Very good. Thank you. I'm sorry to use your name. It's just an example. Forgive me, man. All right. Does everybody understand what I've said so far? Irma? Irma May? Good girl. All right. What about you, Ronald? Do you understand what I've explained so far, Ronald? Good on you, Ronald. Enjoy your Coke, mate. You're making me thirsty. Enjoy. All right. So let me go back to the slides. All right, so we all understand what syntax is, and we all understand why they're commonly charged. So let's look at this simple diagram, and let's just go through it to make things easier. The key difference between customs, duties, and excise taxes. All right, so let's look at the application. Okay, so applied only to imported goods crossing international borders. Customs, duties, tariffs, excise taxes applied to specific goods or services or activities, whether imported or produced domestically. All right, for example, cigarettes, tobacco, and petrol. Let's look at primary purpose. Why do they actually charge these? To regulate international trade and protect their local manufacturers. Okay, and it also helps the government to generate revenue and discourage people from buying dangerous products like alcohol and cigarettes. When is this paid? It's paid by the buyer, the importer, when the goods are received at their country of delivery to the buyer. And they're paid during the customs clearance process. All right, so let's talk about importing electronics from China to the Philippines. Here we go. Shipment of smartphones. The freight on board price, that means putting the freight on board the ship, okay? CIF, cost inclusive freight, means freight on board plus freight and insurance. Okay, so CIF is the total of the freight on board, including freight and insurance, which we know as CIF. All right, so here we go. So the freight on board is 50,000. The freight charges are 3,000. The insurance is 500. That means the CIF value is 53,500. The customs duty when they arrive in the Philippines is 5,350 United States dollars. That means the customs value and duty will bring the total cost of the goods up to $58,850. Okay? Then, if you have to pay VAT in your country, depending on the country, which is value added tax, that would add an additional $7,062. So that means the total cost of the goods landed in your warehouse will be $65,912. Now remember, the rate depends on the code and any Asian country that's involved. Many electronics qualify for 10%. However, when you import electronics into the Philippines also adds value-added tax because the phones are considered a luxury item. That means you have to pay the 10% plus the value-added tax charged in the Philippines. So, for you to sell your phones, you divide the number of phones by $65,912. That will give you your cost price. Then you have to add your profit margin. All right, tax structure. What is the tax structure? This is a specific per unit tax. Example, $13.50 per gallon of distilled spirit or whiskey. Okay, then you add volume tax, a percentage of the product's selling price or value, which means 7.5% excise on domestic airline tickets. Okay, and that would mean tax added to services. Some countries combine both methods by charging a fixed amount plus a percentage of the selling price. For example, a fuel distributor sells 100,000 gallons of gasoline. If the excise tax is 0.20 per gallon, the company pays 100,000 times 0.20, and that means they would have to pay a total of 20,000 in excise taxes. So most companies would combine the specific per unit tax with the volume tax, and they will actually charge them as one. You don't need to know the distinction between the taxes as long as you're aware of the total excise payable when those goods reaches your country. And you can find that percentage by looking up the charts, as I told you, or checking with the seller. All right, so products that are subject to excise tax, they are fuel, gasoline, diesel, tobacco products, alcoholic products, airline tickets, tires, heavy trucks and trailers, firearms and ammunition, indoor tanning services, sugar beverages in some jurisdictions. All right. Now, remember, these goods are subject to higher taxes because they affect public health. But electronic goods may also be subject to excise, but the excise may be lower to protect local manufacturers. For example, a brewery producing beer. If they produce 50,000 liters of beer, excise tax based on the government's applicable rate of tax before distributing the beer to the wholesaler and retailer. So the brewery would pay the tax on the alcohol leaving its factory to the government, and then they would sell you that alcohol, including the tax in their selling price, but you may still have to pay an excise to your own government when the alcohol reaches your country. Hidden tax. These are taxes that are hidden because they're usually included in the selling price rather than shown separately. And that would include the alcohol tax paid by the brewery on the beer that they export. Okay, when you purchase a bottle of wine for $25, part of that price already includes the excise tax paid by the manufacturer and or the buyer, the importer. Who pays the tax? It usually falls on the responsibility of the manufacturer, producer, importer, or retailer. Okay? If the manufacturer or producer do not pay it, then at the end of the day, you'll also pay it, depending on the regulations in your own country to protect industry in your own country. All right, for example, an airline sells a domestic flight ticket that is subject to 7.5% federal excise tax in the US. The airline collects the tax as part of the ticket price and pays it directly to the government. But who pays that tax? The passenger when he buys the ticket. All right, so let's compare customs duties with excise taxes, okay? All right, I want you to listen carefully. What is it? Customs duties are a tax on goods that cross international borders. An excise tax is a tax on certain products, no matter where they are made, charged at the port of entry to the buyer. When is it charged? Only when goods are imported or exported are customs duties charged. Excise taxes when specific goods are produced and sold or imported. What it applies to: imported or exported goods based on the type and value and origin. Excise taxes are on selected items like fuel, alcohol, tobacco, and airfares, and depending on some countries, mobile, electronics, etc. Why governments use it? To control trade and protect local industries, to raise revenue and discourage harmful use. If you're buying mobile phones, it would usually be a customs duty when they arrive in the Philippines. But if you're talking about items which are dangerous, like alcohol, tobacco, etc., they would be an excise tax charge to discourage people from using them. Who pays it? Usually the importer, the person buying it, or the seller. Cost is passed to the buyer. Okay, so the importer is the person that is buying it. He imports it into the Philippines and sells it to the customer. So the importer, the buyer, pays it, and then he increases his price to the consumer to get that money back. A product can face both. Imported wine pays a customs duty at the border and an excise tax because it is alcohol. Both add to the final price, as I explained earlier. All right, so when we look at this, let's talk about this. Okay, so if we talk about customs, duty, and tariffs, tax on goods crossing international borders, and if we look at the excise tax, tax on specific goods or services or activities, regardless of the origin. International border, goods crossing an international border, and it comes into excise tax, which is the manufacturer, sale, importation, or use of specific products will bear an excise tax to protect local industries. Most imported goods, selected goods like alcohol and tobacco, of course, and it goes down the list. All right, guys, electronic goods. Who ultimately bears the cost? Imported electronics price, consumer via higher imported prices. Okay, look at alcohol. Higher prices, and who pays for them? The consumer. So if we talk about a typical example, a US company imports wine from France. When the wine enters the United States, the importer pays a custom duties based on the product's HTS and CIF value. The same would happen if you were importing wine from France to Vietnam or the Philippines. Step 2, excise tax. Because the wine is an alcoholic beverage, it is also subject to federal excise tax, and the importer pays this to the government in the country where they're going to sell it. Final result, both taxes increase the cost of the wine, the importer and retailer typically include these additional costs in the selling price. Does everybody understand now in reality what duties, excise, and taxes are? Yes or no? Okay, great. Has anybody ever imported goods? Put your hands up if you've imported goods. Has anybody imported goods? What have you imported, Julianne? Can you tell me? Hi, Julianne.
Hello, sir. Can you hear me, sir?
What goods have you? Yeah, go ahead. What do you import?
Actually, I'm a owner of Indonesian restaurants. Since my husband is Indonesian, we build up in the Philippines actually.
Right.
So
Okay.
we are
So,
importing actually all the spices from Indonesia to keep the authenticity of our food.
and you find yourself paying duties and customs when you clear those spices?
Actually, yes, sir. But
Right.
for us to also to less cost, what we do
Yeah.
most of the time, if we travel back in Indonesia, we will use we will buy baggage. So instead of paying taxes, we will just buy the baggage to bring for the
Yeah,
spices. So
yeah, but
we
Julianne, you have to be very careful because if your government catches you, you could end up behind prison bars. It's called avoidance of tax and excise. All right? Listen
yes, sir,
carefully.
yes.
You can do it a few times, but eventually they will pick it up. So you don't want to do it every month. You may do it once every 6 months, but it's a very dangerous game, and I cannot tell you to do it because you
Yes,
get
sir, yes.
yourself into trouble. I'll give you an example. I know
Mm-hmm.
somebody who sells hubble bubble or shisha in countries like Indonesia. Okay. Now,
Mm-hmm.
the tobacco, if they import that tobacco from countries like Iran or Saudi Arabia and it comes in as cargo, they will pay tobacco tax on it in Indonesia. All right. So guess what these guys do? They go to Malaysia, they buy it from a wholesaler in ringgit. They put it in their bag and they bring it into Indonesia as personal consumption. Okay. Now, can I tell you, do you think that the customs officer is going to get suspicious if every time you come into Indonesia, you declare 5 kilos of tobacco?
Actually,
That
for us,
they
sir,
will.
is because
Trust
the
me, they will.
case. Yes, sir.
They,
Because our case
right.
actually we address it to them that actually so far what we bring is mostly like consumption because we are not that big restaurant
Yeah,
yet.
I know, Juliana, I know what you're saying. I've done it. I've
Yes,
been there before. Trust me, you have to be very careful, Julianne,
yes, sir.
because
Thank you
if you
so much.
keep bringing in consumption, they'll eventually ask you what business you run, and you can land yourself in hot coal. All right?
Yes, sir.
If you
Thank you
want
so
to
much.
do it, you have to be aware of the risk. The best way to avoid risk is get different people to bring it in for you at different times. So don't always you carry it. Maybe get your mother to go and bring it back, get your father to go and bring it back, get your brother to go and
Mhm.
bring it back. But if they detect the same passenger all the time, you can land yourself in a bucket of hot fire. I'm just giving you advice as your teacher, okay? I've
I
seen people
understand,
get
sir.
into a lot of trouble, all right? I've done it myself. I've done it myself, Julianne. I've carried tobacco
Yes, sir.
into Indonesia. I carried 2 kilos. I got through the first time. Then my friend said, could you bring it again? I said,
Mm.
no, because you want to see the look on the customs
Okay, sir.
face when he saw 2 kilos in my bag. All right. But I was lucky. I was a first
Yes,
time
sir.
visitor. So he let me through. Do you think I would
Um,
take the risk again? No. And
the same with
that
us, sir.
same week, my Indonesian friend tried again. And guess what happened when he reached Bali? He got caught. They confiscated all his tobacco. All right. So
Mm.
he'd been doing it for 2 years. And this time he tried. And guess what? They asked him to pay like $2,000 in taxes. He said no. They confiscated and destroyed the tobacco he bought. So what I'm saying, Julianne, it may work once or twice, but you have to be very careful. Okay. And Indonesian law is becoming very strict on Indonesians returning to Indonesia. And I believe it's also, from what I understand from the Philippines, they are now opening their eyes too because they're trying to collect more duties at the airport. So my warning to you as your teacher is be smart, but be careful. All right, young lady? Okay.
Yes, sir. And actually, we consulted the embassy in the Philippines, the Indonesian embassy. They can help actually because we said that
Yeah, I know.
maybe they can help.
They'll tell you what amounts you can get away with, and I'm sure they've done that, right?
Yes, sir. Thank you
Yeah,
so much,
okay.
sir.
But make sure you don't go over those amounts, all right? And I hope to visit one of your restaurants when I come to the Philippines. You think I
Yes.
could do that to try your food?
Oh, yes, sir.
Go,
Actually, for the meantime, we are closed for maybe 2, 3 years. For some, we get some struggle, so we have to close for a while, and then we are planning to
well,
reopen
if you
again.
ever hope to open again and you need any advice, you just message me. I'd love to help you, okay? All right?
Thank you, sir.
It's my pleasure. Thank you, Julianne. Very good question. Very good question. Thank you so much for that example. Does everybody understand Julianne's example? There is ways to avoid paying taxes, but you have to make sure you don't get caught. Does everybody understand that? Yes or no? And what Julianne told you is something that many suppliers do. Now, I'll give you an example. I used to live in Dubai in the United Arab Emirates. And the spices they use there to cook kabsa or biryani are very special. So, when I came back to Singapore, I went to restaurants here and they use the same spices. You know what they do? He sends his wife to Dubai every 3 months on a shopping trip and she buys 2 or 3 kilos of spices and brings them back. But guess what happened a few months ago when Singapore Customs asked why she kept bringing in spices? They allowed her to bring them in, but she had to pay excise on those spices. Why? Because there was the same spices sold here in Singapore by a different manufacturer. The quality wasn't the same, but they were trying to protect the local supplier. Do you understand that, everyone? So as long as you monitor the amount and keep it to what's called personal consumption, you might get away with it, but you have to be very careful. Does everybody understand this? You bring in smaller quantities, but be careful. If you get caught, the penalties are very heavy. Okay, guys? Does everybody understand that? The better way would be to import it legally, pay the tax, and then increase your price to the consumer. But will that still allow you to be profitable or price conscious? That's where you have to make a decision. Do I still import or do I use a local alternative? Does everybody understand that? Yes or no? Does anybody eat steak here? Who eats steak? Put your hand up. Who eats steak? Does anybody eat steak? Julianne loves steak, don't you, Julianne? I know that. I can see it on your face. Okay, Zuriana loves steak. All right, every time you go into a restaurant and order Australian beef imported from Australia, when it arrives in your country, they will pay an excise on it because the government in your country is trying to protect local farmers. But most consumers will pay extra for Australian beef because it's one of the best beefs in the world after Japanese beef. All right. If you talk about US used to be great, but the standards have dropped. So if you look at world rankings now, Japanese beef has moved to the top of the ranking. Australian beef and American beef come close by, depending on the country where it's eaten. And lamb, New Zealand lamb, is the most expensive lamb in the world, right? So when you import these, countries that grow their own beef and their own lamb will charge an import excise to protect the local farmers. But for the consumer, they still prefer the imported quality steak, as I'm sure Zuriana would tell you. Is that right, Zuriana? You still prefer imported meat. Okay? All right, so let's go on. I'm glad everybody understands it so far. All right, so let's go on. I'm going to talk briefly about trade between China and the US. In 2026, when Mr. Trump came back to office, there was a tariff war with the US. Okay? Rather than applying a single tariff, many Chinese products entering the United States are now subject to multiple layers of tariffs, meaning that more than one tariff can apply to the same imported product. For example, iPhones coming out of China. This system is referred to as layered tariffs or stacking tariffs. Each tariff is authorized under a different US law that was introduced to penalize Chinese manufacturers and protect armed companies in the US. Does anybody know what Mr. Trump was trying to do by doing this? He was trying to convince Apple to close its factories in China and open factories in the US. Do you think Apple's going to do that? No. Why? Because the cost of producing iPhones in the US, the cost of getting all the parts and circuitry to the US and building assembly lines would outweigh the current cost of the iPhone. So, Apple said to Trump, this won't work. We cannot move our factories to the US. In return, Trump was able to compromise on the taxes on Apple phones, but he still imposed higher taxes because they came out of China. And now Apple is seriously looking on taking its phone production from China to countries where the excise is lower, like India or Vietnam. But they can't do that in one day because to set up a factory to build iPhone is a very complicated process. Does everybody understand that? Yes or no? They won't produce phones in Singapore because salaries are too high. That's okay, Melanie, as long as you've joined the class. All right. So the main objective with companies is to reduce their cost so that buyers can still afford the product. So the trade war between China and the US has made a lot of manufacturers reconsider. A lot of companies who used to buy t-shirts from China will no longer buy from China. They'll buy the same t-shirt from an Indian or Vietnamese manufacturer because the tariffs are lower, because it doesn't come from China. Does everybody understand that? Yes or no? The cost of the t-shirt in Vietnam buy me more. For example, if Cheryl buys Chinese t-shirts for $2 each, Cheryl, because you love Chinese manufacturers, you can buy the same t-shirt in Vietnam for $2.40. However, the tariff imposed on when it reaches your country will be lower. Because if you buy the cheaper one in China, by the time they impose a tariff against a Chinese manufacturer, you will still pay more for the t-shirt. Do you understand that? Okay, so that's why China is no longer popular when people want to buy goods to import and sell. All right? Does everybody understand what I'm saying? Yes or no? Okay. Okay, so let's go on. So the trade war in the US was to protect trade for American manufacturers. For importers, understanding these tariff layers is critical because they directly affect the import cost, the price which you sell it at. It will affect their decision on whether to buy from China or not. It will affect which supplier they buy from, and it will affect how much profit they can make on the product they sell to their consumer. And if the product becomes too expensive, they will no longer be competitive. So many companies have changed. They have started buying product made in Vietnam, Mexico, India, or Thailand to reduce the exposure to tariffs imposed against Chinese manufacturers. All right, so there are layers of tariffs on Chinese imports in the United States, and each one is different. Tariff 301 was introduced during the US-China trade dispute to address concerns over China's alleged unfair trade practices. This is forced technology transfer, intellectual property, discriminatory licensing practices, and government support to protect certain industries. Okay, these 301 tariffs only apply to goods imported from China. Okay, so let me give you an example. Rates generally range from 7.5 to 100% depending on the product category and government policy. All right, for example, a US electronics retailer imports computers from China. Customs value is $500,000. 301 tariff will be 25%. So that means he will have to pay $125,000, which brings, okay, the total cost to $625,000. And in addition to this, he will still tariffs under International Emergency Economic Powers Act. US government impose additional tariffs on any Chinese imports. Okay, and again, these can be an additional 10%. Now, you don't have to worry about these unless you're in the US importing from China, because these only apply in the US. For example, continuing the previous example, the goods valued at $500,000 times 10% is $50,000. The Section 301 tariff is $125,000 plus the IEEPA tariff would make it $175,000 for a US company importing from China. Section 232 tariffs are primarily on steel, aluminium, cars, and automotive parts. Okay, and these tariffs Trump has now increased to 50%, and this is to reduce the number of Chinese-made vehicles coming into the US and affecting American motor car manufacturers like Ford and Holden. All right, for example, a US manufacturer imports Chinese steel worth $1 million. He will pay 50% tariff, and that means US $1 million times 50% is $500,000. Okay, now on top of this, he has to pay 301 and IEEPA. All right, so layered tariffs matter because layered tariffs dramatically increase the landed cost of imported goods coming from China. So that's why many customers are no longer buying from China. So a company importing steel from China would face regular customs duty, 301 tariff, IEEPA tariff, and 232 tariff. And that's why it's no longer feasible to buy from China. Okay, let's just look at that, how it works. February 2026, temporary measures, 15% tariff. July 2026, the government actually imposed together with other applicable customs duties, which is what I told you. Okay. In February 2026, Section 232 products were exempt. By July of 2026, the exemption was removed by Trump, and now all tariffs are applicable to Chinese-made products. Okay, a US retailer imports household appliances from South Korea with a customs value of $800,000 times 15%. That means $120,000. So the total cost of the goods becomes $920,000. It's still cheaper than importing from China. Okay. All right. So different products are subject to different tariffs. depending on the current tariffs set by the US government on trade from China. But remember, if you buy from Korea, it's still going to be lower than China. If you buy from Thailand or Vietnam or Mexico, it's still going to be cheaper than buying from China. Here we go. Visual guide to approximate tariffs and reasons. Fuel. Okay, protect domestic manufacturers and reduce dependence on foreign electric vehicles, 100% tariff. Semiconductor business, 50% tariff to protect US chip makers. Okay, solar panels, they're so cheap in China. The US government imposed 50% to encourage investment in making renewable energy in the US and not importing from China. Steel and aluminium, 25% to protect US steel manufacturers. And as you can see, batteries for electric cars, again, 25% to protect US battery makers. Consumer electronics, 37.5%. Okay, and this is made up of 30% base tariff plus 7.5% as the 301 tariff that I told you about, therefore, to protect US electronic manufacturers. All right, so electric vehicles we've spoken about, semiconductors we've spoken about, solar we've spoken about, steel and aluminium, and electric vehicle batteries. So, ladies and gentlemen, remember, consumer electronics can mean your handphone, can mean your laptop, your tablet. It can include any electronic item. China also imposed tariffs, okay? So China retaliated. And what they did is they responded by imposing tariffs on goods imported from other countries. During the US-China trade dispute, China introduced tariffs on many US exports in response. So there is goods that China takes from the US, but that could be chips or whatever. So Chinese factories had to pay higher tariffs to bring those in to China, up to 125% on selected US products, 20% on US crude oil, 25% on liquefied natural gas, which meant that now the US cannot sell as much to China because buyers in China do not want to pay the extra duties. Okay, so the war between China and the US goes on, and people buying from China in the US are now very selective on whether they still do business with Chinese manufacturers. Federal excise tax, distilled spirits, cigarettes, gasoline, how the tax is applied. Let's look at it. For distilled spirits, fixed amount charged for each proof gallon of distilled spirits imported, produced domestically. Okay, when it comes to cigarettes, okay, fixed amount charged per pack of cigarettes, gasoline. Now, this is the same if you're importing these goods into the Philippines or wherever. They all use the same principle. Custom duties is paid first. The amount of custom duty depends on the factors such as the harmonized tariff schedule based on the CIF, which is cost inclusive of insurance and freight. Failure to pay the required customs will mean that you cannot clear the goods and you will incur storage if you don't clear them from customs. All right. Does everybody understand what I mean by that? All right. Say if Cho Cho Win imports T-shirts from China. She imports 25,000 T-shirts. She found them cheap. The Chinese factory said, I'll sell them to you for $1. By the time you pay the excise and duty, you can still sell them for $1.50. But Cho Cho did not check on whether they're cotton and polyester. The Chinese manufacturer lied to her. The goods arrived in the Philippines and she had to pay more excise and duty. By the time she got them in the Philippines, they were too expensive. The t-shirt is no longer $1. It now costs $4. So Chocho cannot sell it. No one will buy it. So Chocho does not clear them from customs. Now, the longer she leaves them in customs, they will charge her storage. And eventually, after 30, 60, or 90 days, customs will write to Chocho and say, if you do not pay the tax, we'll destroy your shipment. And that means all the money she paid to the seller, the manufacturer, is lost. Do you understand that, Chocho? Yes or no, Chocho? Very good. Excellent. Okay, let's keep going, guys. So remember, it is the buyer, the importer's obligation to check the correct duty before you buy from the seller. Okay, let me give you an example. A US beverage distributor imports 10,000 bottles of whiskey from Scotland with a customs value, CIF, of $250,000. If the applicable customs duty rate is 8%, the importer pays 8%, which is $20,000. So the cost of the goods now is $270,000. Only after this customs duty is paid can the shipment be processed through customs clearance. So if the buyer does not pay the $20,000, customs will destroy the alcohol and the buyer will lose their $250,000. Does everybody understand that? Yes or no? Okay. Business example. Continuing the whiskey example. The importer brings in 1,500 proof gallons of whiskey. Federal tax, excise tax is 1,500 times US $13.50. That means it is now $20,250. All right, so customs duty is 20,000. Federal excise tax is $20,250. Now you have to pay $40,250. Now, the rate of customs duty and tax will depending on the country you're buying from and the country in which it's being delivered. You have to check that before you buy. And also, if you want to import alcohol, you need to have a special license from your government. Otherwise, the shipment will not be allowed to enter your country. Does everybody understand that? Yes or no? All right. So total import cost increases. That means the selling price increases. You will either have to raise your selling price to retain your profit margin, and you will have to be a lot more careful, calculate your cost and your profit and the selling price. Evaluating whether importing or sourcing domestically becomes more cost effective. If you want to sell t-shirts, you can probably buy the same t-shirts from a Filipino factory cheaper than China, and you could sell them for a cheaper price because you're buying them in your own country and you avoid excise and duty. Business example, a company imports gasoline. Customs value is $800,000. Customs duty is $64,000. Federal tax is $36,800. Freight insurance and customs brokerage fee is $19,200. So the shipment arriving in that country is now $920,000. So you will have to pass that extra cost onto the buyer, the consumer, which means your selling price is going to go up. Just a simple example. Okay. Here's an example for iPhone. Listen carefully. A US electronics retailer imports 10,000 iPhones manufactured overseas with a CIF of $10 million. The iPhones are shipped to the United States and later sold to consumers through Apple stores and phone companies in America. When the shipment arrives in the US port, US Customs and Border Protection determines whether the iPhones are subject to import duties or additional tariffs. This will depend on the country of origin, the HTS tariff schedule, current US trade policies with the country they're coming from, and any exemptions or trade agreements. If the iPhones are manufactured in a country subject to US additional tariffs like China, then the buyer, the importer, has to pay those or the goods will be destroyed. Business example. The CIF value is $10 million. 6 zeros. Okay? $10 million. Okay? 6 zeros is not 10,000. Okay? So let's go on. If the applicable tariff is 10%, custom duties is 10 million times 10%, which is 1 million. That means Apple or the importer pays US 1 million in customs duties before the shipment can enter the US. So he would have to recover that by selling the iPhones at a higher price. Okay, tobacco, gasoline, airline tickets, firearms. All right, again, Apple imports 10,000 phones. Custom duty is 1 million. Federal excise tax is 0. Although customs duties may increase, the cost of importing iPhones, no excise tax is charged simply because the product is a smartphone, but there is still a custom duty of $1 million. Okay, so remember, after paying customs duties, Apple calculated the landing cost of importing the iPhones, and that included the purchase of the goods, insurance, freight, customs duties, custom brokerage fees, warehousing, and domestic transportation. Since there's no federal tax, the landed costs increased only because of custom duties and other import-related expenses. So we have 10 million plus 1 million plus the customs and brokerage handling of 50,000 plus domestic transportation to transport them across the United States of 100,000. So now these phones have cost the buyer, the importer, $11,150,000. So that means the selling price to the consumer will increase. Does everybody understand that? Yes or no? All right, sale to retailers. Again, business example, after paying import costs, Apple adjusts the wholesale price to recover the additional $1,150,000 by selling the phones at a higher price to the wholesaler, and eventually the buyer will pay more. All right, so if we look at this business example, an iPhone has a retail price of $1,200 plus the total sales tax of $96. The total paid by the consumer will be $1,296. The customer does not see the customs duty separately, but part of the retail price, which means when he buys it at $1,296, he's already paying the taxes. All right, so everybody understands how the US taxes work. All right, so you can go through those. Now, what we're going to do here is I want you to do this exercise for homework. All right, everybody listen carefully. I want you to think of a US company that imports 1,000 Chinese-made lithium-ion EV batteries. All right, listen carefully. The country of origin is China. The HTS code is 8507. The CIF value is $200,000. The batteries are subject to tariff of 25% and 301 tariff of 25% and an IEPA tariff of 10%. I want you to calculate the cost. Okay, I want you to tell me what tariffs are applicable based on the PowerPoint slides that you're going to read. Calculate the total customs duty and write it in your solution. Does everybody understand that? Yes or no? And then I want you to calculate the total landed cost. So you've got to tell me, how much did you pay to buy them from the manufacturer? Cost, insurance, freight, plus all the taxes, all the duties you have to pay in your own country. What is your landed cost? Does everybody understand this? Yes or no? Okay, you need to, if you're not sure, just work on the figures that I've given you so you understand the basic principle. Or you might want to go and check what is the duty charged for government when the goods arrive in your country. Okay, you can go to the internet and ask, I'm importing lithium-ion EV batteries from China to the Philippines. What is the duty in the Philippines? And it will tell you. Does everybody understand that? Yes or no? Good. All right. I then want you to tell me who pays the tariff. Of course, the buyer. How will the tariff affect the price of the batteries? And what could happen if the company moved production from China to Vietnam? The answer is simple. The cost will go down, the tariffs and duties will go down. Does everybody understand this? Yes or no? Yes or no? Okay. All right. So what would the company do if to maintain its profit margin after paying higher tariffs? And what strategies could the business use? Well, after paying the higher tariffs, they'll have to sell them for a higher price or look for a supplier from a different country where the taxes are lower. Does everybody understand what I've said? Yes or no? Okay. Now, I want you to read the slides. I want you to work out the answers. And next week, when you receive the PowerPoint, I will also send you the answers to the questions, okay? You don't have to send me your answers. I will give you the answers. Does everybody understand that? All right? Okay, let's talk about questions. Does anybody want to ask me any questions about what we've covered today? Okay. All right. So does anybody want to ask me any questions? Let's start. Does everybody understand what excise and duty is? All right. Who can tell me? What is excise and duty? Yes, Butch, go ahead. Open your microphone, Butch.
Those are the taxes to be paid by the importer.
I'm sorry, can you speak up?
Yes, hello.
Yeah, go ahead. Could you speak up?
Those are the taxes whose the importer is going to pay.
Good, excellent. So what does that do to the selling price? Does it increase the selling price?
Sorry, sir?
So when you apply excise and tax to goods that you're importing, what will happen to the selling price to the consumer? Will it go up or down?
It will go up, sir.
Very good. And before you buy and pay the tax, as a buyer, what should you do? You need to check what is the tax to find out whether the product can still be sold competitively in your country, right? Because if you import goods and pay the supplier and then find out that you have to pay 25% duty, you may not be able to sell the product at a profit. You may lose money, right? So the onus is also always on the importer, the buyer, to understand how much are the taxes before you import to your country. Does everybody understand that? Good answer, Butch. Okay. Do you drink beer, Butch? Are you a beer drinker? Okay. What beer do you drink, Butch? Tell me, what's your favorite beer?
In Philippines, the Red Horse beer is the
It's a local beer, right?
yes, sir. Yes,
And
sir.
the reason why you drink a local beer is because it's cheaper than an imported beer.
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much. Muhammad Islam, very good answer. Does everybody understand that? Yes or no? Well, Merle says that if I understand it correctly, our excise tax affects inflation. Well, inflation is the cost of living, means that things cost more. Okay, well, basically, excise and duties are levied on the goods themselves, depending on the types of goods and the countries they come from. Okay, so do they affect inflation? Well, when goods become more expensive to buy, then that's inflation. All right. Now, whether you want to say it was caused in simple terms by the excise, the more expensive goods become in your country where you go to sell them, the more difficult it means for the end consumer to buy them. Does everybody understand that? Remember, the end consumer can only spend the amount of money they have in disposable income. Does anybody know what disposable income is? Who can tell me? What is the consumer's disposable income? Come on, who can answer my question? Come on, I don't want to speak to the same people. Yes, Cheryl, what's disposable income? Open your microphone, young lady. What is disposable income, Cheryl Osoy?
For me, sir, the disposable income of a consumer is like they are willing to pay off, they are willing to trade off, like they are the capable of spending for their like
Very good.
income. Yeah.
Very good. So that means how much is Cheryl prepared to pay for the iPhone in order to still be able to afford food and medicine? What is the amount she can spend? What is her disposable income? Thank you, Cheryl. Can I
I
ask
have a
you?
question, sir.
Yeah, just hold
I
on
have a
before you do that.
question. Okay.
I'm going to let you ask it. Just give me a minute. So can I ask you, if somebody can buy a Nokia for $200, okay, and then compares it to an iPhone at $2,000 and a Samsung at $1,300, the consumer has a very simple choice. He is going to buy the one that he or she can afford. Would you agree with me, everyone? Yes or no? Okay, good. Go ahead, Cheryl.
Like why the major corporate like Apple do strategic lobbying? Because we know that Apple doing lobbying in America, doing import from the China the product, like what they're producting from China, they do import on America. So what the advantage of doing lobbying?
Well, let me
Like
explain why. Apple pays a lot of tax to the American government on the income they generate every year.
so
Let me just
why the government
explain.
allowed it and what is the disadvantage to other
No.
competitors? Or
Hold on. The government will never not allow it because as long as Apple is generating a profit, a corporate profit, which is in the hundreds of billions of dollars every year, they have to pay tax to the US government. The US government will never say no to the tax, right? So let's just get that
yeah.
straight. The US government will never discourage them from doing business, all right?
So
Because the
lobbying
more
is
profit they
illegal.
generate, okay, hold on, I'm coming to that. The profit they generate equals tax revenue for the US government. Now, why is lobbying allowed? Because they are one of the US's biggest companies. They're one of the highest revenue generating companies in the United States per capita. They generate a higher income than any other US company in the United States. All right. The number of employees they have in the US alone is in the thousands. Now, So there's two reasons the US government allows them to lobby. One, because of the revenue they generate in taxation. Two, the number of jobs they provide for Americans. That if the American government didn't listen to them, they would simply fire people to reduce their salary bill and lower their costs, which is not what the American government wants. All right. Because if suddenly Apple fires 10,000 workers out of its 13,000 workforce, that would mean massive damage to the unemployment line in the US. So the reason that the US government allows the lobbying is to protect its own market. So the US government will allow them to lobby. All right. They will allow them to lobby. But, Cheryl, the fact that they lobby doesn't mean they'll get the outcome. Do you understand what I mean? What lobbying is they're appealing to the government and keeping communication open. All right. Now, if you understand that Apple is very smart, Apple has said to the US government, we can't bring our factories to the US, but we're currently looking to take them to Vietnam or another country where tariffs are lower. Okay. Now, they've also said to the US that if you want us to bring our manufacturing to the US, we want certain returns from the US government. The US government has not been prepared to do that. Do you know why? Do you know why they're not doing that, Cheryl? Because they'll eat away in the tax they're earning from Apple, all right? Because if you give them something, you lose somewhere else. So can I ask you, if you were the US president, do you prefer the millions of dollars in taxation, or do you prefer to give them some allowance to manufacture in the US? Which one is more money to the US government? Well, it's realistic, Cheryl. He makes more money out of the tax that Apple pays on its income. So will the lobbying ever stop? No. And let me tell you, Apple is not the only company that lobbies the US government. Coca-Cola lobbies the US government. Coca-Cola is lobbying the US government every day about what damage it's done to its product going into China. You do know that Coca-Cola syrup comes from the US and is sent to bottling plants in China because they can't make Coca-Cola unless they get syrup. There's only one distributor of the syrup, Coca-Cola in the US. So what has the Chinese government done? They've retaliated by putting higher excise and duties on the importation of Coca-Cola syrup into China. So that means people pay more for Coca-Cola in China, right? So there is a two-way effect, Cheryl, when you look at it, okay? There's a two-way effect. Now, can Coca-Cola complain? Well, they can complain as much as they want. But again, Coca-Cola is one of the highest income producing companies in the world. They're in the bucket with iPhone, Coca-Cola, and some of the big American giants who pay billions of dollars in tax every year. The government is not prepared to let go of that money. Do you understand what I'm saying, Cheryl? So when it comes to a question of lobbying is not it's not a law of economics. It's not an economic theory. It's a political game. Do you know what I mean by that? I'll give you an example. If Apple says, I have 13,000 employees that will vote for your government tomorrow, but I'm asking for help. And I'll tell my 13,000 workers, if you work for us, please consider voting. Now, it is against the law in the US to tell somebody how they should vote, right? It's a freedom. But however, Apple does it in a very good way. It tells its employees, guys, all of us want to keep our jobs. We want our industry to remain profitable and successful. The US government is prepared to do this for us under a Trump administration. So what do you think that their workers will do? They want to keep their jobs. They'll vote for a Trump administration, all right? But Apple will never say directly, vote for Trump, because that will breach of US citizen rights under the Constitution. They have the choice and freedom of voting for whoever they like. So Apple doesn't want to get into a tangle over that. But, lobbying is just a political tactic used in the American hypocrisy. And it's not only in America, Cheryl. It happens in Australia from Australian companies. It happens in Korea from Korean companies like Samsung. It happens in Indonesia from companies like Gojek. Have you heard about Gojek in Indonesia? Has anybody heard? Gojek's chairman has just been implicated in frauds amounting to hundreds of millions of US dollars by the Indonesian government. All right. Now Gojek is asking the Indonesian government for leniency because Gojek is one of Indonesia's most profitable companies. It's an Indonesian-based company. All right. But its chairman has had to stand down. He is totally out of Gojek. He is facing criminal charges in Indonesia, which may send him to jail for 20 years. All right. Now, but companies all over the world lobby. If you remember Samsung, does everybody know the Samsung story? The chairman of Samsung was alleged to have practiced corruption with the former Korean president, the lady who's in jail, right? He went to jail as well. Samsung lobbied the Korean government, saying Samsung is one of the biggest Korean companies employing Korean nationals in our factories. All right, they lobbied. They lobbied hard. The Korean government eventually reduced his sentence and put him under house arrest. Okay? And now he's a free man again running Samsung. Okay? So lobbying happens all over the world. Do you understand that? And it's something that companies use to blackmail governments by saying, listen, this is how much tax we pay you. This is how many people we employ. Do you follow me? And let me tell you, Samsung is not only Samsung Electronics. Samsung makes phones, fridges. They make, they build ships at Samsung heavy metal shipyards. So their tax bill every year to the Korean government runs trillions of dollars. They employ nearly 30,000 Koreans, if not more, in all their factories. Do you think the Korean government wants to see those people unemployed? Do you think they want to see Samsung close its doors? Hell no. Samsung is the pride of Korea, right? Everybody knows Korea, Samsung, right? Does anybody use a Samsung phone?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, that's right. Yes, Suswati. Gojek is originally from Super App in Indonesia, and its chairman has been implicated in fraud. That's correct, yeah. Okay, but he has stepped down now, and there's a temporary chairman. Okay? Does everybody understand? Sorry, does that answer your question, Cheryl?
Yes, sir, because as a BBI student, I really want to understand because as we know in the business, political factor, it's big impact on the business for like
Absolutely.
competitive, of course, and the stability. So that's why I want to understand.
But
Because
does that
as
help
you
you?
say, it's
Did you
common now, even
understand
in
it
my
now?
country. Yes, sir.
All right,
Because I
listen,
really
Cheryl,
want to.
let me just take it from a BBA perspective. If I was teaching this class to a bachelor's student, I would talk about the laws of economics and I would relate it to economics and economic theory and economic principles. All right. But we don't have time to go into economics. So what I'm just going to say to you is that lobbying happens and lobbying and it's done directly to the government of the day, okay, or the GOP of the day, the government of power, but it's done in a way to actually say to the government, you want our taxes. You want our taxes. And the government allows this lobbying from the other side to protect the economic stability in their country. Because let me tell you, if the US government collects less taxes, less federal taxes, okay, and the number of unemployed people goes up, that will have a direct impact on the US economy, right? Two things will happen. Cost of living will go up, inflation will go up, unemployment will go up. There will be a lot more people claiming social welfare in the US. It will have a direct effect on the US economy, all right? Now, when we talk about stagnation or inflation and the rules of economics, we can have a 2-hour lecture on that and I can teach you that. but we can do that maybe at another time and date. But do you understand the simple explanation now?
Yes, sir, I
Yes.
understand because
Uh,
I want to understand the disadvantage or the advantage
Yeah.
on.
The disadvantage to the government is they lose the tax, they create unemployment. The advantage to the company is to show that they care. Um, they don't usually succeed. Apple has not succeeded. Um, Apple did not succeed. They did not get their way. Trump actually said that, we want people to buy American product, but because it's made in China, there will still be an excise on it because it's coming from China. However, there's no tax on value added tax. Phones in the US are not a luxury item, so we won't add to that, but there is still an excise because they come from China. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yes, sir.
Okay, great. Thank you so
Thank you
much,
so
Cheryl.
much, sir.
And Cheryl, listen, if you have a specific question, drop me a message and I'll give you a detailed answer and I'll explain the economics. All right? I'm happy
Thank you,
to do
sir.
that for you. I'll write
It's
the
a
answer
pleasure
for
for
you.
me, sir. Thank you so
It's
much.
my pleasure. I love questions like this. This is what makes my lectures more interesting for everybody. All right? Thank you, Cheryl.
Yes.
Does anybody else want to ask an interesting question like Cheryl? So, as I said, Nelson, the topic of excise, duty, and taxes has an implication on businesses all over the world. The implication is twofold. If the excises and taxes are raised on goods coming from a particular country, therefore, the price that you're able to sell those goods in the buyer's country goes up. And therefore, that will have an effect on the selling price. It will have an effect on you being competitive. It will have an effect on profitability. Does everybody understand this? Yes or no? Hello, Nelson. Where are you, Nelson? Can you open your microphone for me, Nelson? Where's Nelson? Medina, could you open Mr. Nelson's microphone? Are you there, Nelson? You want to say hello? Nelson? Medina, could you search for Nelson's name and open his microphone? Anybody? Anybody else have questions? Okay, hold on. Let's just see who else has questions. Okay. All right, here we go. Let's talk to Nelson first. Go ahead, Nelson.
Yes,
Open your
hello.
microphone, mate. Okay.
Hello, sir. Yes,
Have
sir.
you learned anything from today's lecture, Nelson?
Yes, a lot,
All right.
sir. Because that's why I want you to continue on the topics because
That's okay.
sometimes
But let me just explain.
we
Let
are
me just
distracted. Yeah.
That's okay.
Yes.
Now, let me just explain. Cheryl's questions was really important to all of you. And the reason she asked that is how does lobbying in the US affect excise and taxes imposed by the US government? It doesn't affect them, but it also means that it doesn't stop companies from lobbying. Does everybody understand that? Okay. But in simple terms, for what Nelson's asking, is the importance of today's lesson is what can excise taxes and duty do to your business as a seller? So if Nelson was importing laptops from China to sell in his country, and if he was to buy those machines in China and bring them into his country, there will be an excise on electronics, no matter where they go in the Philippines or where. Now, the question he has to ask himself is it still feasible to buy them in China, or is it more economical to buy them from another country that is manufacturing electronics like India or Vietnam? It comes down to a question of cost effectiveness and competitiveness. Now, some people will argue that China is still the best country for certain products, and that's true. But what you have to worry about whether you can compete in your market. If you buy a laptop, a non-branded laptop from China, you can have it delivered to you in the Philippines for 130 US dollars. All right, one. That's only one for personal use. But when you buy 25, trust me, the Filipino Customs Department will charge you an excise duty on 25 units. One may come in as personal use, but you buy 6, 12, or 25, it will become a commercial shipment. You will pay excise and duty. So that machine that you bought for 130 CIF will eventually bear an excise of probably $20, and the cost of that will become 145 US, and then you have to add a profit margin of probably 30%, and that will give you the Filipino peso value in your country. So you have to ask whether it's still feasible. Does that help you, Nelson? Nelson,
Yes, sir.
have
Yes,
I
sir.
answered
Yeah, I
your
just heard about
question?
that. But yeah.
Do you
Yes,
have
sir.
any other question you'd like to ask?
Yes, sir. Yes, yeah.
Do you have another
No,
question you'd like to
yeah.
ask me?
No, it's okay.
Are you sure?
No, sir.
Good on you, Nelson. Have you enjoyed today's class, Nelson? Has it helped you? Very good, sir. Thank you so much. And Nelson, if you have any direct questions, just message me and I'll answer you. No problem. All right, mate? Okay. Okay. Who else would like to talk to me? Mercy de Leon, would you like to open your microphone? Hello, Mercy. Are you there, Mercy de Leon? Okay. Julianne Uchamaka, would you like to talk to me? Go ahead, Julianne. Hi, Julianne.
Sir,
Yeah, what's your question? Go ahead.
actually,
I can't hear you,
uh,
Julianne. You need to buy a new microphone. The
uh,
microphone you've got doesn't work. It's okay. What is your question?
appreciate. Hello, sir.
You're
Can you
welcome,
hear me now?
Julianne. I hope you've
Hello,
enjoyed
sir.
today's lecture. That's okay. Julianne,
Yes,
can
sir.
you
Yes,
write your...
absolutely.
You're welcome. I hope you've enjoyed today's lecture. If you have any question, can you write it in the chat box and I'll answer it? And please, can you buy a new microphone before next week? Because the one you're using doesn't work. All right, gorgeous,
Okay,
please.
sir. Thank you
Good
so
on
much.
you. Good on
Thank
you.
you so
You're
much.
welcome.
Okay.
You can buy one on Shopee for like $5 US, okay? Something similar to this, and they're much better quality. And I think you can buy them now for about $7.50 or $8 US, and they'll deliver them to you in 4 or 5 days, okay? And they're much more reliable than that, all right? I'll see you at the next BizTalk. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining me for BizTalk.